Welcome, everybody, to my new tier list. Last time I did the Kings of Gondor. It was a while ago. I've been hung up with other stuff, so I haven't quite gotten to doing the ones for Arnor. And a good reason for that is there aren't as many pictures for me to rip from the internet of these kings. So I had to make my own banners, and I'll talk about them as we get there. So, we are doing the Kings of Arnor and Arthedain, which was one of the Arnorian successor kingdoms. This will be fun, and hopefully it won't be as long as our Gondor one. There are less kings for Arnor. We won't be doing the Chieftain of the Dunedain, other than the reason... I guess I can't give a huge substantial reason other than I didn't want to add the Chieftains. There's not a lot known about the chieftains, and is it appropriate to count chieftains along with the kings? They are of the line, and the line that ultimately gives to Aragorn, who of course we're going to rate on this list. So I don't know. I might do the chieftains if I think about it enough. I'm not in a huge hurry. I don't have a huge push for that, but let's get started. Okay, so a bit of this will be a little bit of retread for Gondor. Let's talk about Arnor for a little moment. Arnor was founded at the very end of the Second Age by this guy. The way I had to do the pictures, it's landscape, so some of them get a little cut off. So you'll just have to trust me that that they're there. So the first one is Elendil the Tall. Elendil the Tall, his name means Star Lover, was of course a Númenórean, the Prince of Andúne in Númenor, in the western promontory of the island. He was leader of the faithful, who, when all the Númenóreans were falling to the dark influence of the king's men and later Sauron as an advisor to the king, the faithful retained their practices with all the, I guess, ethics and cultural practices that the elves had taught the Númenóreans earlier in their history at the beginning of the Second Age, that kind of gave them the amount of splendor and power and wealth that they now craved as Númenóreans, and they were turning their... It's kind of a poetic thing, right? They got prosperous, and now they're turning their backs on those traditions and institutions that got them prosperous in the first place. You know, because they want to live forever. They've become jealous of the elves. Elendil rejects that and sticks to the old ways. And I talked about his whole story in the Kings of Gondor, so I don't want to dwell too much on that. But in the Akalabeth, the great downfall of Númenor, when Ar-Pharazôn the Golden sails west to try and conquer Valinor, God, Eru Ilúvatar, breaks the world and sinks Númenor beneath the sea. Elendil foresaw this coming, and he fled. There were a number of ships. I think there were like 9 ships of the faithful that sailed east from Númenor to Middle-earth. Elendil landed at the harbors of Mithlond, the Grey Havens, where he met Círdan the shipwright. And I guess with the help of some elves, and he led his people into what is now Eriador, in the region where the Shire is, and he founded Arnor, which is glossed as something like the royal land, or something like that. And he builds his fortress Anúminas on the shores of Lake Evendim, which becomes a great city of Arnor, and he leads a prosperous kingdom. He organizes the lands, probably makes all kinds of different agreements with local rulers, maybe even does a little conquest. He was a warrior. We don't have all the nitty-gritty of the state building he did, but he orders Arnor. He creates it, and he does pretty good. Getting to the last alliance with elves and men. Again, I talked about the whole war at the end of the Second Age, but Sauron returns. He threatens the free peoples of Middle-earth, so Elendil and Gil-galad get together, and they create the last alliance of elves and men. Gil-galad being the High King of Noldor, basically the chief of most of the elves, at least the ones in Lindon and Rivendell. And I guess he's commanding in some capacity Cinda elves and maybe even some wood elves, who knows. I don't remember, is Thranduil mentioned as having fought at the Battle of the Last Alliance? I don't know. But anyway, him and Gil-galad, Elendil and Gil-galad, defeat the forces of Sauron. They break into Mordor. This is the prologue of the Fellowship of the Ring. Gil-galad and Elendil fight Sauron. They fight him, and all three of them ended up being slain in battle. Sauron, of course, as an immortal Ainu, can't die, but he's wounded in a way that is substantial. And unfortunately, Elendil and Gil-galad are slain, and that ends the tale of Elendil the Tall. He ruled for 121 years. He lived to be over 300 years, I think the longest lived of any of the Númenóreans in exile. After that, their lifespans are a lot shorter. And he was tall, he was 7'11", big guy. When I ranked him as a king of Gondor, and he was king of Arnor, but he was also the high king of the Dunedain realms, the realms in exile, because his two sons, Isildur and Anarion, were the co-kings of Gondor. See, they had landed in the south and founded that kingdom. Founded the city of Osgiliath and the places that would one day become Minas Tirith and Minas Morgul. And so he was their lord, but also was king of his own realm in the north. So I'm going to rank him S tier, because that's what I gave him in the Gondor. S tier. Great king, laid the foundations for his realm that would last 1,000 years or so. Ruled over great prosperity, a powerful warrior, a wise ruler. He led his people away from the decadence and the folly of the Númenóreans and went to Middle-earth. And he gave his people a new home there. And he killed Sauron, or at least wounded him. And that's a pretty big feat, especially for someone of the Second Age, and not, like the more heroic First Age, where, I don't know, they were just built different back then. But yeah, Elendil, definitely S tier. It's a shame he had been slain, but he was already pretty old, so I don't know. He was hale enough to fight in battle, so he was probably getting up there. But yeah, Elendil, S tier king, S tier. The second king is Isildur. His picture of him is a little cut off. So, I think a quick aside about Arnor, if you're a little confused, and I feel like if you're watching this video, you know what Arnor is, but in case you don't, Arnor is not really mentioned in the movies. It's mentioned in a deleted scene, I believe, in the Two Towers, when Éowyn is talking to Aragorn, and she kind of marvels at his age. He's 87 at this point in the movie, and she calls him a Dunedain, and he confesses that there aren't very many Dunedain left because ever since the North Kingdom fell, and that's probably the only mention of it in the movie. Arnor is mentioned in the book a little bit more. Arnor, I just said, was one of the two Dunedain kingdoms founded by the Númenórean exiles in Middle-earth. Arnor was in the northern part, Eriador, by the Shire. And spoilers for the tier list. It does end up falling in a pretty sad and tragic kind of way. Unlike Gondor, which, despite not having a king, endures until at the end of Return of the King, when Aragorn claims the throne and becomes its new ruler. So that's Arnor, and in some maps of Middle-earth, I think the one that comes with the Lord of the Rings book, you'll see an overlay over Eriador that mentions the lost kingdom of Arnor. So it seems that even though Arnor is gone, there's some kind of memory. Like there's that's where it used to be, and that's where it should be in better days, in brighter days, or something like that. Anyway, on to Isildur, whose name means the moon servant. He was the son, of course, of Elendil. He was also a Númenórean, and he did some pretty cool stuff. It was his job, when the faithful were planning to flee to Middle-earth from Númenor, Isildur went to the White Tree of, was it Nimloth? I think there was a white tree in the capital, like the big palace in Numenor, which was grown, I think, from a seed that came from one of the ancient trees that lit the world. It's a big part of the mythology in before the First Age, before the Valar, the angels, the God's servants on Earth, made the sun and moon. The world was lit by lamps, and then the lamps were destroyed when Melkor marred Arda. It's a whole thing. Melkor, the big bad guy, Sauron's former boss, and then the Valar took pieces of the lamps and they planted 2 trees, and these must have been gigantic trees that were so bright that they managed to light up the world. And one was golden, kind of like the Malorn trees in Lothlorien, and the other one was silver, like the white tree of Gondor. I don't remember the trees' names, but Ungoliant, who was Shelob's mother, I guess, giant spider demon creature thing, and it has an insatiable hunger. She ate the tree. She like sucked out the sap of the trees and killed them. And they took like a fruit of the tree, the Valar, and made the sun and moon, the fruits from those trees. And then I think they also took a fruit and planted another white tree. It's embarrassing. I don't know the whole story, but somehow the spawn of the silver light tree became the tree in Numenor, and Isildur managed to smuggle a fruit from that tree and bring it with him to Middle Earth, where he planted it in, I believe it was Minas Ithil, which would later be captured by Sauron and captured by the Ringwraiths and become Minas Morgul, excuse me. And we see that in the Return of the King movie, that the thing is shoots like the green light, and the hosts of Sauron come marching out. So Isildur saves that tree. The tree has a very deep, probably spiritual and cultural significance for the Dunedain, and that's a pretty important thing that Isildur did, because otherwise the scion of that tree would have been lost in the sinking of Numenor. And it's probably important because that white tree on Numenor at the time was the last remnant of that once giant silver light tree. So I already mentioned Isildur and his brother Anarion, who is not in the movie, but he is in the books. Well, he's mentioned in the books. They land in Gondor, found Gondor. They build the fortresses of Osgiliath and Minas Ithil and Minas Anor. Minas Anor later becomes Minas Tirith. And of course, Isildur makes the deal with the king of the Hill tribe and curses them when they don't join his battle. Isildur fights with his father Elendil in the War of the Last Alliance at the fortress of Barad-dûr. And of course, Elendil kills Sauron. In the movie, Sauron slays Elendil, and then he slays Elendil, and then Isildur takes the shattered sword, the Narsil, and slices Sauron's fingers off, and then claims the ring. In the book, right, it's described that Isildur took the ring from Sauron. Sauron's corpse was there, and his spirit, I guess, had fled away, because as an Ainu, Sauron can decouple his spirit from his body, but his spirit was wounded in some way. Isildur takes the ring, and there is counsel. I believe, is it Elrond who's mentioned? Like in the movie, Elrond counsels Isildur to destroy the ring, right? To cast it in the fires of Mount Doom. Isildur in the movie is portrayed as giving into the temptation of the ring. He keeps it, right? Because it's got such a powerful hold. In the book, there might have been an element to it, but Isildur claims the ring as a wergild, I think, something, which was an old Anglo-Saxon practice of money, basically, that you take from someone because they killed a relative of yours, or they've wronged you in some way, which Sauron killed his father, so Isildur claims the ring as wergild. And Isildur keeps the ring, and for the next 2 years, he goes back to Gondor and orders the realm, and because his father had died, in a battle that makes Isildur now the King of Arnor and the High King of the Dunedain. And he's on his way. His brother Anarion had died in the siege of Barad-dûr. So Anarion's son, Isildur's nephew, Menelil, it's in the Gondor video. Isildur makes his nephew the king of Gondor, or kind of, approves his succession, I guess it could be called. And then he orders Gondor and does other stuff, and then he goes on his way back to Arnor to claim, his authority there in the north. On his way, he is accosted by a party of orcs, his men, his soldiers, and he is slain, and of course he loses the ring. The ring betrayed him, right? I believe he put the ring on to conceal himself, because it makes you turn invisible. And then as soon as because the ring seems to have a mind of its own, and it wants to get back to Sauron, and so in the chaos of this battle, as Isildur is slipping away, invisible, the ring sees an opportunity to get back to its master. So I think it gets bigger, and it slides off Isildur's finger away from him, because that's what the ring wants to do. It wants to get away from Isildur. Isildur is now visible, and he's found by orcs, and they shoot him with arrows, I think. And Isildur is killed at the Gladden Fields in the Anduin Vale. The ring, of course, sinks to the bottom of the river, and it stays there for 2,500 years until Sméagol finds it. Later becomes Gollum, and then Bilbo finds it in the Misty Mountains during the events of The Hobbit. Isildur reigns about 2-3 years. I wrote notes for a lot of these guys. It says 3 years. The dating between the second to third age is kind of weird, because there's not an absolute dating system for a lot of these events. So that was just it. He only ruled for a few years as King of Arnor. As King of Gondor, he's far more successful. So I have an interesting choice here. As King of Gondor, he ruled for, I think, 100 years or so. He was very successful, right, with his brother, laid the foundation. Same thing with Elendil. He built those institutions, whatever they may be. He gave his people a new kingdom to live, new lives to rebuild, and he fought against the forces of evil, and he triumphed against Sauron. Now, I ranked him as an A tier as a King of Gondor, because he basically he gave into the ring's temptation and kept it instead of destroying it. Had he destroyed it, he would have been the greatest hero of his age, probably. Of the Third Age, he would have destroyed evil. There probably would have been no Third Age per se, because when the One Ring is destroyed, the power of the 3 Elven Rings would go away as well, and the elves would continue to fade, and they'd have to go west a lot sooner than they ended up doing, I guess. But he didn't destroy the ring. He kept it. And I thought that was basically the only blemish he had on his record, which was considerable. It was a big blemish, but not enough to bump him from anywhere below A. He was an A tier. Here, I am ranking him as a King of Arnor. As a King of Arnor, do I take into account the fact that he had a successful reign as King of Gondor, or do I judge him on the merits of being King of Arnor alone? And I think in the interest of making it more interesting, I will judge him for being King of Arnor alone. And I'll tell you this. He probably made some arrangements for a successful kingdom, but he kept the ring, and he got ambushed, which... getting ambushed by the orcs, right? He was traveling a way that maybe he assumed was safe, and as a king, as a military guy, and as a guy who presumably has, spies and servants and messengers everywhere, maybe he should have known that the way he was going wasn't so safe. Maybe there were rumors that the orcs were still around and causing trouble, and maybe being brigands on the road, and maybe he didn't heed the warnings of his ministers, or of the people around him. He didn't heed his counsel, so to speak, and maybe he should have known better. I'm assuming a lot there, but we can't deny that he took the One Ring and didn't destroy it, and that's going to mark him down. He didn't get to do much as King of Arnor. He only ruled for a few years before he was killed. He got his 3 oldest sons killed in that battle too, and he broke the unity of the Dunedain realms, because after that, Arnor and Gondor pretty much go their separate ways. I like Isildur, and I was proud of myself for giving him a more critical treatment in my previous tier video, but I don't know, as King of Arnor and High King of the Dunedain, I don't know, he's not an F tier. F is for guys who actively are trying to hurt the kingdom, or like Casimir, I believe, was the one guy I voted, Castamir of Gondor, because he usurped the throne and created the Kinstrife. I gave him an F because he was a bad guy. D is kind of for not malicious but indolent guys. Isildur was not malicious and he wasn't indolent, but he did make a very poor decision near the end of his reign, and another poor one at the very end when he got killed in an ambush. So it's a C or a... I'm gonna have to go C. I don't want to be too harsh on Isildur, but yeah, C. C is like my... B is gonna be my average, I guess, because I gave so many Kings of Gondor a B, and that ended up being kind of the mean. So yeah, Isildur is a C. Not awful, not really great, not even really a good King of Arnor, because he didn't get to do much, and probably marred by a few mistakes, big mistakes. But had he lived, had he survived the Gladden Fields, I think he could have done a lot of stuff. Maybe, hunted down the last remnants of the orcs. I could judge him on maybe what he could have done versus what he did. It's my list. He's a C tier. C tier. Okay. Next one is Isildur's 4th son. So his 3 other sons, who I do not remember the names of. I didn't write them down. I think Ohtar was one of them. Verondar, something like that. His youngest was actually still a child. Actually, no. According to my notes, he was born during the War of the Last Alliance. So I think... I don't remember exactly what it says about Valandil, and his head is cut off here, so you can't see him too well. But he was born either like just before or maybe even during the time when Isildur went on campaign. He was very young when Isildur died. He would have been 9, I think. The War of Last Alliance lasted what, like 7 years? He would have been... He would have been still a kid. So there was a regency for Arnor when Isildur dies, and Valandil is now the oldest surviving male heir because his 3 older brothers were also killed. And Valandil is actually... he's the first Arnorian king to be born in Middle-earth, the first native king, if you will. Because he had a regent, and I believe the age of majority for the Númenóreans would be higher than it was in a lot of other situations in medieval Europe. His age of majority, I think, was 21. In some places it was like 16, maybe it go in like 20 or 18, but for Valandil, I believe it was 21. So for probably close to, or maybe even a little more than 10 years, he was regency was in control of his kingdom. But we do not know. Eventually, he does become king, of course, as he reaches as he becomes of age. Valandil, I didn't mention his name, means the Valar lover. Cool little name. He has the longest reign at 239 years, which is that's a long reign. That's especially compared to a lot of the other reigns of Arnorian kings, which are fractions of that. I think the longest reign besides that is only 125 years, I think, is the next longest reign. So he has a very long reign, and I can imagine they were prosperous. He built on the foundations of his grandfather, because Isildur honestly didn't get to really rule much. But yeah, I think he was a successful guy. We just don't know much. We don't have many events from this, and that's going to be the case for a lot of these Arnorian kings. We just don't know much about their reigns, other than a couple words like they were peaceful, they were good. What I'm going to say, though, is a reign of 239 years. That's a long time. That's like humans in the real world, of course, generally don't live as long as Valandil does in the Legendarium. But any king ruling for like 20 or 30 years is often considered successful, right? Not being deposed, not being, caught up in civil war, not being killed in battle. And we don't know if Valandil did any kind of battle or did anything like that, but I'm going to have to give him an A tier. If we knew more about his stuff, I could give him an S tier, but I can't imagine Valandil reigning for 239 years. That's almost two and a half centuries. That's, what is it? The year is 2022. That is almost as long as the United States has been a country. And he managed to rule. He probably did all kinds of cool reforms, all kinds of stuff to ensure the longevity of his reign. Coinage, economy, politics, I don't know, the needs of the rural folk. Who knows what he did. I'm going to give him an A. A good king, great king. He's not quite his grandfather, but, long reign. 239 years, man. That's a lot. And he did it. He passed his throne on to his son, Eldakar. Who's the next one, number 4. Eldakar. Alright, so here's where it gets a little funky. I did not have pictures for a lot of these guys, so I had to make up my own pictures. And I'm not much of an artist, so you probably notice little blue thingies at the bottom, and I'll tell you what these are. These are basically, I invented a little flag for Arnor. Because the emblem apparently was the star, the white star on a black field. It was the I forget what it was, but it was an artifact. It was like a circlet of mithril with a white star in the center. It was kind of like a symbol of the kings, and Aragorn apparently keeps it in Rivendell. It's a symbol of the Arnorian Kings, and he wears it when he becomes the king of Gondor and Arnor again. And I thought that's a neat coat of arms, and I decided to make him a flag. It's just that the coat of arms on a canton in the left on a field of azure, which is, I don't know, I like the color blue, and I was trying to figure out a color for the Arnorians. I guess blue, the sea. I know they're not as sea-oriented as the Gondorians, but they are Numenorians at their descent, and that's where they are. So yeah, so that is what I am doing. Hold on, I just noticed something that might be a little funky. Okay. And on each of the flags, I wrote the names of the kings in Tengwar, which was a bit of a process, but I'm proud of it. So this is Eldakar. Eldakar, his name means the elf helm, was the son of Valandil. He is said to have a peaceful reign, and he reigned for 90 years. B tier. Yeah, that's what I did with a lot of the Gondorian kings who they reigned peacefully. Eldakar. We don't know how much that peaceful reign was because of his own efforts or the efforts of his father, but Elfhelm is a B tier. I gave Valandil an A tier just because I'm so impressed with the amount of years he reigned. Eldakar, he reigned 90 years, which is also a really long time, but I just don't know much. Number 5, Arantar. Let me see. I gotta brush up. They're all out of order when you upload your pictures to the online space. Everything gets a little muddled. So, this is embarrassing. Here we go. Is that Aran? No. Look, I'm gonna be delayed because I can't read it. I can't read my own little things. Where are they? Here we go. Okay. Arantar. His name means High King. Cool. He's the son of Eldakar. Alright. Peaceful reign, 96 years. Easy peasy. He's a B tier. Tarkil, which unfortunately did not get put in. It's probably because I had a... So I had a file. I had a picture of Tarkil. Or not Tarkil. Talion from the Shadow of Mordor game series, which I really liked. I thought they were a lot of fun. A little weird in canon sometimes, but it's alright because the game is fun, the characters are fun. Having Celebrimbor arguing his spirit, arguing with oh no, did I just give it away? Having the elf guy argue with Talion is a lot of fun. Fun game. I had a picture of Talion from the game, but it didn't make it to the tier, and I didn't proofread it because I'm a dummy. I included Talion for the 6th King Tarkil because his name is possibly is the origin of the term Tark, which the elves or the orcs used to refer to Gondorians and I guess Numenorians in general. You know, there's the Tark! Watch out for the Tark! They say it in the Shadow of Mordor games all the time. And apparently Tark became kind of a casual term for Gondorians in the Western speech of all the free peoples of Middle-earth. He was the son of Arantar. Another peaceful reign, 80 years. He's going to be a B tier. Let's just pretend I have him here. Woo -woo. B tier. Alright, next is Tarandor. Means the King of Stones. Let me see where he is. Tubawuba. There we go, yeah. Tarandor. Here we go. I guess I could cheat, but I want to show, yeah. Tarandor. Let me see my notes. Son of Tarkil, peaceful reign, reigned for 87 years. Again, boring. B tier. He's just a B tier king. Valador. Valador, what a name. Valandor, excuse me. Valar's servant. He was the son of Tarandor. Alright, here we go, yeah. Valador. He died violently of some unknown cause. We don't know. He is just described as having died prematurely of some violent end. Probably fighting a war on his borders against some enemy, maybe orcs, maybe wild men, who knows. It's not said. I always have a dim view of kings that die in battle. He reigned for 50 years, so he probably did something good. I don't want to give him a D tier because I don't really have explicit details on his death or anything like that. So yeah, a C tier. As a king, I believe it's one's duty to, rule the realm, be that beacon of stability, order, justice, all that stuff. You have a duty to defend the realm and lead your men into battle to ensure that you preserve the internal peace. And you can fight in battle. Don't fall in battle, because when you fall in battle, you fail your people. You have failed your people as king, because now they don't have a king. If you provided for the succession well enough, it's not so big a deal, but it would be better if you hadn't fallen in battle, especially because if you fall in battle, there's a good chance that your men in that particular battle are going to rout or get killed, and that's never something you want. So, Valandor, I don't know if your death was really your fault. Maybe you got ambushed. Maybe it was an honest mistake. Maybe you were betrayed. Who knows? But should have been more careful. What can I tell you? That's good water. All right, number 9, Elendor, the Star Servant. Not to be confused with Elendil. No, this is Elendor. Let me see where he is. Here we go. Elendor. So, Elendor, son of Valandor, peaceful reign. He reigned 125 years. This is always kind of funny with the ages of the Kings of Arnor and Gondor. Is they live pretty regular. Like their lifespans are pretty regular. In that I read an article detailing they were graphing all the ages of the kings of Gondor and Arnor and Numenor, and they all their ages were specifically chosen. Tolkien chose them to describe a declining trend, right? Especially once the kings of Numenor start turning away from the teachings of the elves and the Valar and more towards trying to live forever, ironically their lifespans go down, and it's kind of a precipitous drop. And even though the Gondorians and the Arnorians kind of stick to the faithful practices, they've still kind of had that gift of longevity that the Numenorians enjoyed. It is slowly being retracted. So each generation lives less and less time. So Elendil lives to be 300 and something. Isildur lives to be over 200 years old. Valandil lives to be over 200 years old. And then as more and more generations go by, they keep living less time, right? They only live to be 200. They only live to be 150 by the middle of the first age, or the middle of the third age. I don't have any figures to substantiate a lot of this stuff, but yeah. So it's just a lot of it's a steady decline. And so when you get a king who dies prematurely, like in Gondor, Arnor, it's happened several times, their heir usually reigns a really long time because they still have a lifespan that they're going to live, because the Numenorians tend to not get old until like the last, certain span of years before they die, right? They don't start aging halfway until they get to when they die. They start aging maybe 10 or even 5 years before they start to die. And then part of the gift of the Numenorians was that when it was their time to die, they would sense it. They knew that they were getting old. They were slowing down. They were like, that's all right. I did all that I needed to do. And then they would just willingly lay down and rest and give up the ghost. Not suicide. I'm sure Tolkien, as a very devout Catholic, would not describe this as a suicide. It was a resignation, right? I have done what I was appointed to do, and now it is time for someone else to take over. I don't know if the Arnorians and Gondorians got that ability. I know Aragorn did. And Aragorn also got to live a lot longer than the last generations of the kings, but I just thought that was an interesting thing to observe. What does that have to do with Elendor? Well, his father dies violently, so Elendor reigns peacefully for 125 years, which is a long time just because his father didn't get to serve out his term all the way, so to speak. Again, peaceful reign, long reign, 125 years. I'm going to give him an A, again, just to be a little more interesting, in saying he had to take over the kingdom after its leader had been killed, and he reigned peacefully, which means whatever killed his father, Elendor had to deal with, and he did it capably enough that his kingdom experienced 125 years of peace. Good job, Elendor. Alright, number 10 is, here we go, Earendor, which means the sea servant, kind of like Earendil was Elrond's dad, devoted to the sea or something? I don't know. Earendor, son of Elendor, reigned for 84 years, and he is actually the last king of Arnor. This is an interesting fellow because we don't know much about his reign, but we know what happens after his reign. When he dies, his sons divide up the realm into the three splinter kingdoms of Arthedain, Cardolan, and Hrúdawr. Hrúdawr is the only one mentioned in any of the movies. It's mentioned in The Hobbits, pertaining to where they put the ringwraiths in the High Fells, I think it was, in crypts in Hrúdawr, as Galadriel says. Hrúdawr being in the areas of the Troll Shawls and between the Horwell and the whatever rivers over there, kind of in the region just to the immediate southwest of Rivendell is Hrúdawr. We'll talk about those kingdoms in a bit. Earendor, there's actually some notes about what he was doing. I don't think I wrote down too much. I think he probably tried to prevent this kind of strife, but he wasn't able to. The kingdom was divided up into three pieces, and Arnor would never rise again as a great power in the north and would always kind of be on the defensive from then on. Arnor, Arthedain, and Cardolan and Hrudauer. And we don't have extensive histories or chronicles or anything like that. I can't read a big old history book talking about how the ministerial policies of Arendur's reign weakened the critical institutions of the kingdom. We have nothing like that. So all I can do is assume that Arendor probably tried to prevent such a thing happening. He might have seen that his sons were discordant and that they were probably starting to recruit nobles to each of their sides to support them to the throne and cause this this fracturing of the kingdom. Whether or not Arendor could have stopped it, he didn't, which is clear. He failed to do it, and we don't know what kind of task that was for him, to having to stop it. And in spite of that, if we knew the causes and it was clear that he tried to do it but he couldn't, he'd be a D tier. But because we don't, he's a C tier. He's a C tier, yeah. Because one, you want, when you rule a country, and I speak from experience because I play many strategy games. When you rule a country and your ruler die, right, you want to make your state's institution strong enough to where it's not divided on your ruler's death, right? It doesn't split up. It doesn't have a civil war. And civil wars and succession crises happen for a number of reasons, but like the United States, for example, which is where I live, right? There's only one president at any one time. The president has a vice president, and there's a pretty clear set of rules and precedents and traditions and all this stuff to determine who gets to be president. And if somebody contests it, right, then they have to argue that those institutions, all those things did not, play out as they should have, right? All the mechanisms of that institution were bypassed or disrupted or corrupted or something like that. And what am I trying to say? And so that makes a clean succession, generally, right? There's been a couple times in history where the presidency has been disputed, but for the most of the time, the loser will say, all right, I lost, fair and square, those are the rules of the thing. I'm not going to try and declare myself the rival president and, split off. Very big time that happened in 1861 with the Confederacy. So, yeah. With Arnor, when kingdoms are broken up, I'll use the Frankish Empire of Charlemagne, well, technically his son Louis the Pious. When kingdoms break up, happened in medieval times, it's usually because their concept of statehood, their concept of governance is very personal. It's not so much institutional. It's not bureaucratic, right? The kingdom is the possession of the king, and when he dies, his heirs are owed a portion of that inheritance, which is why when Louis the Pious died in 840, his sons, he had 4 of them. One of them died before Louis did or something like that, but he had 3 who outlived him, I believe. They claimed that they were owed a portion of that inheritance, versus in a modern state, like if the king of now King Charles III, if the king of England, king of the United Kingdom dies, his children, which he has 2 sons, are not going to be like, all right, I get half the kingdom and you get half the kingdom. That would be absurd. They would get laughed out of Parliament because the institutions have developed in such a way that you can't divide the state in that kind of personal situation. The state is not just yours to dispense, and there's a whole constitutional debate about what the state is to the king, who the king is to the people, the state, all that stuff. And there's pages and pages and pages of all that. But in modern day, right, you're not going to split up a kingdom because two sons each want to share, because it's not theirs to split up like that. There's a lot more to it. And we don't know the nature of kingship for Arnor or Gondor, really. We just have what's written and what people interpret these writings to be. I've read articles saying all kinds of stuff. But, so we don't know if Arnor was supposed to be the personal possession of its king, or it was supposed to be in the Roman sense, a commonwealth ruled by a king, but ultimately the commonwealth was indivisible and belonged to the Númenóreans in some way. And because it broke to pieces with the death of Eärendil, it would seem to be the former. It was kind of a more personal possession, or the institutional idea of a commonwealth was not as ingrained in the elites of Arnor. That was a long way to kind of discuss Eärendil and his whole thing. He's a C tier because, again, if the institutions weren't strong enough to prevent this breakup, then the blame would not only be on him, but his predecessors, even my boy Valandil here, maybe even Elendil. But by this point, Elendil's been dead 1,000 years by the time Arnor breaks apart. So, how much of Elendil's fault could that really have been? And how many of these? Well, there's more than 9. Yeah, 9, because we don't have Tarkil. How many of these 9 successors could have done to prevent it? Especially Arendor, who had 85 years, or excuse me, who had 84 years to prevent it. Nah. He, yeah. C tier. Okay, next is Amlaeth, who I actually have a picture of him here. Again, his head is cut off. Amlaeth was the eldest son of Eärendil. The name of the origin of his name is kind of uncertain. It might be like light upon poetic ways, like the light upon the darkness, or light upon evil, or something like that. He was the eldest, and therefore he was the heir of Arnor, and it seems to be when Eärendil died and Amlaeth succeeded, his succession was challenged by his brothers, who each took a portion of the kingdom, Cardolan and Hrudar. We don't have the names of the brothers. And it is written that Amlaeth tried to put down these revolts, this succession crisis. He tried to stop it, and he was not able to. And because he was not able to defeat his brothers, he had to... Arthedain, the section that he ruled now, seems to have become a lot more militarized and a lot less stable and peaceful compared to the earlier centuries, because Amlaeth removes his court from Anúminas on Lake Evendim to the northeast to Fornost Erain, which in Sindarin means the North Forest of the King, North Fortress of the Kings, or in the Lord of the Rings, as Gandalf calls it, the Norbury of the Kings. They call it Deadman's Dyke, I think, the people of Bree, by the time of the Lord of the Rings, because it's been abandoned and there's like supposed to be ghosts and stuff wandering around there. So Amlaeth rules for 85 years this rump kingdom of Arthedain, and so here's another interesting choice. And I was afraid that these kings would be a little less interesting, but we have something to talk about. Amlaeth fails to stop the succession crisis. He can't end it. He has to tolerate his two brothers ruling two splinter kingdoms from Arnor, and it doesn't even seem that they recognize. They might recognize his overlordship in some capacity, maybe like from a nominal way, in the way that a number of the barbarian kingdoms, if you've played like Rome Total War or Attila, when the Western Roman Empire falls apart in 476, the barbarian kingdoms, Odoacer, who takes over Italy, and the ruler of the Visigoths, and I think the Vandals as well, despite the fact that they've been fighting Romans for a little bit, they still recognize the Eastern Roman Emperor, now the only Roman Emperor, as the head of like the civilized world. They even kind of deign to pretend to be his viceroys in these western regions, and they definitely recognize his kind of superior dignity in a Christian sense, right? He's the head of the Christian church, but he's definitely like a powerful figure in it, and that was a big part of this time, right? The religious unity, religious community, Christendom, the whole thing. And even if they recognize the emperor's superior dignity and maybe even authority in certain matters, they're not going to be his puppets, right? They're kind of going to do their own thing, and if their interests don't ally, they might even resist the emperor's attempts to govern them, which is probably might have been a situation for Amleth. We don't have any fancy chronicles where say, Amleth claimed to be High King of Arnor, King of Arthedain, as some kind of compromise. We don't know. But what we do know is he was not able to prevent the breakup of Arnor, and Arnor probably declined by a very significant amount because of this broken situation. The civil wars tend to be pretty nasty, so there's probably a lot of wreckage to infrastructure, populations, the economy probably slumped, trade decreased, all that stuff. A lot of violence, bloodshed, instability, banditry, maybe even local warlords rose up. Probably not on the scale of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the spectacular collapse of the Han Dynasty, but definitely not a good time to be like a peasant in this period. Now the big question is, how do we rank Amleth? How much of the problems of his reign were his own fault? How much of this failure to prevent the breakup were his own fault? And I think a lot of historians argue in situations like this, it's like there's only so much he could do. He did the best with what he had. We don't have this kind of information. His withdrawal to Fornost Arine is kind of telling. It really speaks to a kind of desperate situation. He has to go to this fortress to rule because Anumanas is no longer, it either can't be supported anymore or it's too exposed. And that was probably a bit of a shock for the people who had to see that happen. It'd be like if Washington, D.C., again, use the United States. Washington, D.C., when it was founded as the capital of the United States, it was in the middle of the country before the country began expanding west. Now it is on the very eastern part. It's still the capital because that's just where it's been this whole time. But imagine if they relocated the capital to somewhere deep inside Chicago, St. Louis, right? A lot of little alternate histories like to move that there, right? Because it had gotten dangerous enough on Chesapeake Bay and the Potomac that the capital has to be further in the territory of the country, and that is Fornost Arine is definitely not as far away from Anumanas as Washington, D.C. is from Chicago or St. Louis, but it would be a similar kind of thing. It doesn't speak well to the confidence of the government or its rulers that things are okay, that we can perform our duties as the government, as king, to protect the people. We have to go here. This is where we have to be. Kind of like when Gondor does it too, right? Osgiliath is too vulnerable after they lose the left bank of the Anduin, so the kings withdraw to Minas Anor, or Minas Tirith as it becomes, the Tower of the Guard. I don't want to. He's not an A tier. B tier, C tier. I guess I'll give him a C tier. He probably did as best he could with what he had, and he did manage to keep that situation for 84 years. He did, or 85 years. He did rule for Arthedain. So yeah. Well. Well, my notes say his sons divide Arnor on the death of Arendor, apparently by their own accord. So maybe it was a premeditated agreement. Maybe Amleth reneged on it, and couldn't. And his brothers, of course, teamed up and stopped him. C tier. We'll say C tier. We just don't know. But I come on. Yeah, poor Amleth. Next is Beleg. His name means big. Where is he on this list? I don't know. Where did I put him? Here we go. Beleg. Name means big. He was the son of Amlith. He had a peaceful reign, 83 years. B tier. B tier of Arthedain, second king of Arthedain. Oh, I wanted to mention with Amlith here and Beleg, you'll notice their names, if you're a nerd like me, you'll notice their names are no longer in Quenya, which was the first 10 kings of Arnor. They're now in Sindarin, which is an interesting change. And it's not discussed why they do this, but it's probably there to convey a sense that they're no longer as high and noble as they once were, right? This is the decline of the Númenóreans in the north. The kings of Gondor will continue to take Quenya names, but the kings of Arthedain will all have their names in Sindarin. And if you're a sharp-eyed guy, you'll notice that I have written their names in Sindarin. They're in Tengwar, but they're in the Sindarin mode, and which is different from the Quenya mode, which is funky, and it was funky to learn, and it was kind of tricky. But I did it because I think it's cool. All right, number 13 is Malor. I gotta stop losing track of all my names. Malor. His name is kind of uncertain. It may mean golden light. It brings to mind the Malorn trees from Lothlorien. That's Malorn with an N, not Malor, as in the king right here. He was the son of Beleg. He rules for 81 years, and basically what the only thing interesting to record of him is the Harfoots, breed of hobbits, begin to migrate across the Misty Mountains. We don't know where. They probably don't reach Arthedain in his reign. He probably doesn't do anything with them. But he's a B tier. Let's put him there. Where the Harfoots go is probably in Rhudaur, which I already talked about, which was kind of the southwest of Rivendell. Rhudaur also is the it's the least probably Númenóreanized kingdom, right? There's probably the lowest population of Númenóreans. It's described as being inhabited by wild hillmen, and very quickly the line in Rhudaur dies out, and it's replaced by a native hillman dynasty, and quickly kind of turns against the Númenóreans. It falls under the sway of the evil that is slowly creeping back over the course of the Third Age. Cardolan is in the Minhiriath region between the I believe the Swanfleet River and no, not the Grey Flood and the Brandywine River. It's a region to the south of the Shire where the Barrow Downs are. I think the hobbits go to the Barrow Downs in the book. They have a tangle with the Barrow Wights, and that's Cardolan, which was apparently a region with a lot of trees back in the day before the Númenóreans started cutting them down. Next is Kelefarn. That's right. Some of these names are long, so I had to put them. No, that's not it. Here we go. Kelefarn. Kelefarn, who is uncertain his name. It might mean silver stone. One expert contended the dog is all groany. One expert contended that it meant something like Keleb plus Sarn, silver stone, but I don't know. So if it was that, it would be Kelepharn, or it's spelled like Kelefarn. Who knows? Tolkien didn't write a lot of etymologies for stuff like this. But he was a son of Malor, and under his reign, the Fallowhides and the Stoors, the two other breeds of hobbits, crossed the Misty Mountains. He was a contemporary of Hiarmendakil I of Gondor, who was a great king. I don't remember. There were two Hiarmendasils, and I know one had. I don't remember what they each did, but it's a good kind of way to. What do we think? Give a frame of reference for these kings, right? I believe Hiarmendasil reigned over. Maybe it was the apex of Gondorian power in the mid-Third Age. So that kind of gives you an idea for, as Arthedain is declining, it's well past its prime. Gondor is all on the up and up. It's the height of its power. Kelefarn rules for 81 years. Don't know much about him. B tier. Celebrimbor, not Celebrimbor, the elf who forged the 3 elven rings and was deceived by Sauron back in the Second Age. No, Celebrimbor, which may mean Silver Lord, was Celefarn's son. He had a peaceful reign, 81 years. Easy peasy. Goes right there. Next is Malvigil. Malvigil. Here we go. Malvigil. Malvigil may mean the Sword of Gold. Pretty cool name. Son of Celebrimbor. During his reign, Angmar rises in Carn Dûm. 77 years of reign. Carn Dûm rising is something that will, in the going forward, be a very bad thing for Arthedain. And the fact that he was unable to stop it is not very flattering for him. He's a C tier. Don't know if he could have done much, but he didn't, and his descendants paid the consequences. I'm going to have to hold that against you, Melvigil. Number 17, Argaleb the First. So there's, yeah, okay. Here we go, Argaleb the First, which you can see him, he's dead. His name might have mean something like royal silver, because of the crown is usually made of mithril or silver type material. The son of Melvigil. And he claims lordship over all Arnor, since the lines are said to have the lines of Arnor are said to have failed in Cardolan and Trudour. So new dynasties took over those two places. I was kind of musing that Amleth might have claimed some kind of overlordship over Arnor, but Argaleb is the only one explicitly said to have done that. Cardolan accepts his overlordship. Apparently a prince of Cardolan becomes his vassal, which is not too shabby. He's kind of rebuilding the realm, probably slowly. Unfortunately, he only reigns 7 years because he is killed in battle against Angmar. He tried to rebuild. He probably tried to conquer Rudour, and Angmar came to Rudour's aid, because I think by this time they were allied. And he tried, and I'm going to give... He probably could have reinvigorated the realm. He seems to have had the makings of that in some way. But he died in battle, and I'm going to have to hold that against you, bud. You died, and that puts you at a C tier. Had you not died, you might have become one of the greats, but unfortunately, you did. Arvaleg, his son, shown here all heroic. Arvaleg the First, not Argaleb, Arvaleg, kind of little tongue twister thing there. Arvaleg the First, Mighty King is what his name might mean, was unfortunately killed in battle along with the Prince of Cardolan against Angmar, and he relocated the Palantir of Amansul to Fornost. So you may know the story that when Elendil and his sons Isildur and Anarion fled to Middle-earth, they took with them 7 Palantir stones. I believe there were 8. The 8th one is in Tol Eressëa, the lonely island in Valinor. It's just outside of Valinor. It's off the coast. And they're set. So I believe 4 went to Gondor. There was one in Osgiliath, one in Minas Ithil, one in Minas Anor. There was one put in Isengard, or the Orthanc, or Angrost, something like that. It was the Orthanc stone, which is the one that Saruman uses. The one from Minas Ithil is stolen, and Sauron obtains it when he conquers Minas Ithil. The one that Denethor is using is the one in Minas Anor, Minas Tirith. The one in Osgiliath is lost when Osgiliath is sacked, I think, during the Kinstrife. Then there were 3 in the North Kingdom. One was set on these towers west of the Shire. Forget what it's called, but it can communicate with the one in Tol Eressëa. That's what it does. And every so often kings would go there and kind of get a glimpse of that land, because that was basically the only part of the Undying Lands that men were allowed to see. One was in Weathertop, and I want to say that the 7th was in Anuminos, but I don't remember. But under Arveleg the First's reign, it's relocated to Fornost, probably because it's a lot more secure there in Fornost Arine than it is in Weathertop, which by this time is on the borders of Arnor. So, or Arthedain, so it's probably not in the safest place. Arveleg, killed in battle. He reigns for 53 years. He ruled a lot more than his father. Again, had to take over from the fact that his father was killed in battle. Yeah. I'm gonna give him a C tier. Again, I don't like it when kings fall in battle, but he probably did some stuff. Probably kept the faith with Prince of Cardolan, and they tried to oppose Angmar, they just couldn't do it. C tier. Not bad. A lot of these guys, kind of like later Western Roman emperors, which someone in my on the previous video was mentioning, Arnor ranking the kings would kind of be like ranking those emperors. Some of them were mighty. Majorian comes to mind, who might have actually saved the Western Empire had he not been betrayed. But they were operating under very limited circumstances, situations, and they didn't have all the resources. They were betrayed. A lot of politics and intrigue going on, and there was a lot of things working against them. So some of these kings too are having things work against them. So I don't want to be too harsh on him, but I don't want to be too apologetic either by saying, had he not been killed, he would have been S tier. Like, we don't know that. We just know what he did do, and yeah. So, what is next? After Arveleg the First is Arafor, who is, let me see my Arafor. Here we go. Arafor. His name might mean Royal Fist. It's pretty evocative. Son of Arveleg the First. He avenges his father, which is good for him. Good for him. He reigns 180 years, and the Kinstrife occurs during his reign. I like to believe during the Kinstrife a lot of Numenoreans fled north to Arthedain to escape the violence and all the chaos and stuff, but who knows. I love a good avenger, and I love a good king who reigns for so long. 180 years, so he would probably have been pretty young when he became king, because his father died young, so that's an A. Arafor probably saved Arthedain. He avenges his father by defeating probably Angmar, so they can't crush Arthedain like they would have otherwise. And Arafor probably couldn't really reinvigorate the realm, but he was given a terrible situation and he pulled out of it. And he's probably couldn't have restored the kingdom, but he kept what he had, and I think that's a win in my book, especially given the circumstances. And he did it for 180 years. So yeah, that's an A tier. Arafor. Argaleb the Second. Yeah, Argaleb. That's not Argaleb, is it? Do I have a picture of Argaleb? I do. Okay. Argaleb the Second. It's right here, yeah? Okay. I'm just double checking. Argaleb the Second. Son of Arafor, the Great Plague occurs. So the Great Plague was a very nasty pandemic that swept across Middle-earth in the mid-Third Age, and it devastated Gondor and Arnor, and basically made it so Middle-earth, by the time of the Third Age, is kind of depopulated, and in a way it's a little post-apocalyptic, right? There's ruins everywhere, there's abandoned settlements everywhere, there's wilderness everywhere, there's not a huge, vibrant network of trade or city life or anything like that. There is in Gondor, but Gondor's really the exception, and I think the Great Plague is what really catalyzes that. And there was absolutely nothing anybody affected by the Great Plague could have done, because it was probably sent by Sauron. He did his little magic powers over it. It was a malicious plague. And I think there was also a winter that happened that was really cold that probably didn't help things. So Argaleb, unfortunately, had to contend with that, suffer the depopulation of his kingdom. It was so bad that Cardolan becomes depopulated. All the rest of... It's said that the last of the Númenóreans in Cardolan die, or presumably some of them fled to Arthedain where it was safer and probably a little less affected by the plague. Kind of like with the real Black Death, there were probably regions that suffered more or less depending on how urban they were or how connected they were with other trade routes. So Gondor suffered heavily, but Arthedain probably suffered a little less. It is known, however, during Argaleb II's reign that he settles the hobbits in the Shire. And that is a pretty important thing to do because, of course, a couple hobbits end up defeating Sauron by destroying the One Ring. But when he settles the hobbits, I think he just gives them a few orders. He's really not, as a weakened king, right? He can't really... He doesn't have the ability to boss the hobbits around too much. So he just gives them the task of keep the roads, keep the bridges, like keep them in good repair, and keep the laws of the king, and that'll be good. And the hobbits appoint a Thane to rule them. And the Thane doesn't really do much. The Thanes always come from the house of Took, Peregrine Took. Pippin becomes a Thane, I think, at some point. And yeah, the hobbits just kind of live their own lives, and they recognize being part of a kingdom is kind of weird. There hadn't been a king by the time of the Lord of the Rings in 1,000 years, but they still recognize themselves as being like subjects of a king that doesn't exist. But it didn't seem to take up too much of their time to be subjects of the King of Arthedain, and yeah, that's that. So Argaleb, I'm gonna give him a B. He reigns for 81 years. He suffers the Great Plague. There was nothing he could do about that. He settles the hobbits. That's a B. I don't want to give him an A because he didn't seem to do much besides the hobbits, which he couldn't have recognized that would have been a fateful decision. He did it probably just because the lands of the Shire, or what would be the Shire, were so depopulated by that point. He needed something to bolster them, so he found these little halfling folk, and he was like, "Hey, be my subjects," and they agreed. I want to give him a C tier because he didn't seem to have any major failures. Just unfortunate circumstances again. There was nothing he could do about the plague, so there. There's one thing I should have mentioned about R4. He was king during the Kinstride. No, I mentioned that already. Never mind. Yeah. I don't know how much that affected him, but it probably made Arthedain look good in comparison to Gondor. Next, we have Arvigil, who is right here. Arvigil, name means maybe something like royal sword. He was the son of Argaleb II. Peaceful reign, 73 years, is a B, just like his daddy. Arvaleg II, here we go. Peaceful reign, 70 years, that's a B tier. We're getting to over an hour of me just rambling on about this pretend kingdom, but yeah, so I want to kind of get through these. Number 23 is Araval, whose name is uncertain etymology, but it might mean something like Golden King. He was the son of Arvaleg II. Araval defeats Angmar with the elves, and he attempts to repopulate Cardolan. This is a guy. He's an A tier, easily. Reigns 78 years. He is up there with Arafor in that he rescued maybe a desperate situation. Angmar was always a thorn in the side of the Arthedainese, and he allies with the elves and defeats Angmar. We don't know. It probably doesn't take really any territory, but he saves the kingdom and he attempts to repopulate Cardolan, right? He is trying to rebuild the kingdom, maybe recultivate these empty lands, jumpstart trade, all that stuff. And he probably has pretty limited success, but he's trying. He's doing it, and he had this success against Angmar, so A tier. Arafant was right here. Arafant, uncertain His name maybe means full king. I don't know, like full treasury, full belly, happy king, rich king, something like that. He was the son of Araval. And this one's important. He weds his son, the future Arvedui king, to Firiel, who was a princess from Gondor. I don't remember whose daughter she was, but it was done because the king of Gondor wanted to forge stronger ties with the other Numenorian kingdom in the north, with Arthedain. And they struck an alliance. And I think that alliance comes in handy later. But that isn't important because the pairing of Firiel with Arvedui would later give rise to Aragorn, who is descended from both the kings of Gondor and Arnor. And that gives him a claim to both of them. And an alliance is never a bad thing. 73 years of peaceful reign. I don't want to overstate. It's always hard, right? Because accomplishments have echoes and ripples in history. So Arafan's decision to wed Princess Firiel to his son was made as a kind of a, I need a friend now. Now it's a good thing to do. Get an alliance with Gondor, closer relations. I don't know if he was really thinking ahead to all the stuff that would mean, right? To actually bring the two kingdoms together. I don't think he really thought that was happening, because Firiel was not the heiress to Gondor. I'm gonna give him a B. With a caveat that what he did was decisive. It was important in the future, but at the time it probably didn't seem like that. And other than that, he didn't seem to have done anything else of note. Arvedui, the last king of Arthedain. His name means last king. So I don't know how that creates an interesting ontological situation. Is he called Arvedui because he was the last king? Did he take that name as king in some kind of, like, I will be the last king of Art? Was he morose and always dwelling on importance or melancholy? I don't know, but that's what his name means. He weds Firiel, of course, and Ondoher dies, the king. Ondoher. I don't know I think Ondoher might have been Firiel's father, now that I think about it. I don't remember how Ondoher of Gondor dies, but when he does, I think Ondoher doesn't have a son, or he does, but his son was deceased. So Arvedui tries to claim the throne of Gondor as the husband of his wife Firiel, who has a claim on it ostensibly. There never were any reigning queens of Gondor or Arnor. There were of Numenor, but never of the exiled realms. So he fails because, one, he's a foreigner. Two, his claim is built on the fact that he's married to a woman who may or may not actually have some kind of claim to the throne. If Gondor follows like semi-Salic law or something like that, right? Women cannot. They can neither inherit nor can they pass on their claims. So who knows? He doesn't end up getting Gondor because I don't think he has any kind of base of support in Gondor, and it eventually goes to a relative of Firiel, who I think he's like Arendor. Around one of the last kings of Gondor ends up taking the throne. So unfortunately, Arvedui ends up being attacked by Angmar after, now that I think about it, Araval defeats Angmar. He doesn't destroy Angmar, which is a shame, but could he have? I don't know. The fact that he didn't destroy Angmar means that Arvedui is attacked by Angmar, and they capture Fornost. They sack it. It's described as having been destroyed, and Arvedui flees north to the ice bay of Forochel, to the Losoth, the Icemen, are kind of like these little Sami reindeer fishermen, herders guys, far northern folk. And he stays there with the Losoth, and he gives them like gems and gold as gifts, and they're simple people. And they counsel him. I believe Arvedui was going to sail to the Grey Havens, maybe even to Gondor to get help. The Losoth advised him not to. Because they feel a fell chill in the air, right? The wind, the cold winds blowing from the north are not natural. They're being sent by the evil, probably by Sauron or servants of Sauron, and that ill portents for his journey. Arvedui ignores their warnings. I guess he's so desperate, and his men are anxious, and he sails, and his ships crash. I don't know if he had multiple ships, but the one he's on at least crashes in the ice, and it sinks, and he drowns, and he dies. His wife, I think, had relocated elsewhere with their son. I didn't write down the son's name. But Arvedui was traveling with 2 Palantir. So those other Palantir I mentioned, there was one in Numenos. I think the one in Numenos was taken to Fornost Arine, and then the one in Weathertop or Amon Sul is also taken to Fornost Arine. So there's 2 there in the Norbury of the Kings. He takes both of them when he flees, but they get lost when they're sailing. They're lost in the ice bay of Ferochel. And that's it for the 2 Palantirs, and at this point there's only 4 of them left in Middle-earth. Arvedui only reigns for 10 years. When he dies, his son, who of course I didn't write down the name of, becomes the first chieftain of the Dunedain. So he kind of leads the remaining Dunedain in Eriador, the former lands of Arnor, as their leader, but they're not really a state, they're not really a country. He's not really a king. He's just kind of leading them in bands. They become the Dunedain Rangers, like Aragorn is. That's how they live. They're kind of semi-nomadic, going from place to place, fighting bad guys, hunting, fighting orcs, all that stuff. They basically protect the Shire and the other towns around there, Bree and Archet, from the evil that would otherwise bother them. Arvedui is an interesting guy. He has no successes in life. We don't know if he was a good guy, if he had the... I want to rank him a D, just because he loses his kingdom, he fails to take Gondor, he drowns because he ignores warnings, and he loses 2 Palantir. That's pretty bad. At the same time, we don't know how much of that was his fault, how much of it was desperation, how much of that was basically, I have no other choice but to do this. I'll just give him a D just because he'd be the only D one. He's the last king. This picture of him is him embracing who I assume is his wife, Furiel, and it makes me sad. Like, this is a poor guy who probably didn't ask for any of this and was unqualified or unable to stop any of it. I will hold the fact that he ignored, well, we don't know how desperate he was, but he ignored the warnings from the Icemen. The Icemen apparently said that he could stay there as long as he needed to and wait out the winter, but Arvedui was getting antsy. And it was unfortunate because shortly after he dies, I believe, one of the kings of Gondor, is it Earnil II or something, along with Glorfindel, who was a powerful Noldoran elf, they go north on an expedition and they fight the Witch King and they destroy Angmar. Carnadum is, I guess, sieged, assaulted, and sacked, and Angmar is no longer a problem. And had Arvedui lived, there's a chance that maybe Arthedain could have been reconstituted, but I guess it was just so far gone by this point, and the Dunedain were too scattered that what was left was just a series of little city-states like Bree, Archet, and the Shire. And there was no king to reassert power, and the chieftains of the Dunedain were more interested with kind of just staying alive than reforging a kingdom. So, I'm sorry, Arvedui, you get a D, just because someone needs to be the D. 26. Now we move on to Elisar. Aragorn, you know him well. Strider. Throngil. He has a bunch of names, depending on... He had a very, very successful career as a warrior, as a king, as a counsel to people, an adventurer. He did all kinds of stuff. Of course, one of the Fellowship. He led armies at several battles in the War of the Ring. He escorted the hobbits as far as he could to the Anduin River. He went to rescue Merry and Pippin. You've seen the movie, you know what Aragorn has done. There's a lot of stuff that he did before the movie. He traveled all around the lands. He went apparently to the south in Harad. He fought in the service of King Thengel of Rohan. It's just, he's an S. I gave him an S. He's an S, right? He takes the crown of Gondor, becomes king of Gondor. He rebuilds Arnor in the north, rebuilds Annúminas. He reaffirms friendship with the hobbits and the Ents. He expands his realm into Harad and Hrun to the east. He defeats the enemies. He plants a new tree in Minas Tirith. And a new High King rules for 122 years before he finally dies in the fashion of the old Númenórean kings by willingly giving up the ghost. Reaffirms friendship with Rohan and King Eomer. Just come on. He's Aragorn. And he takes his name in Quenya Elisar, which means, I believe, hope. Or, no, I don't know. Elfstone, that's what it is. Elfstone. He was called Estel or Hope in his youth, but his reign name was Elisar. That's right. Aragorn. S-tier king. I talked about him a lot in the last video. This video is already getting long. I don't want to gush too much about him now. Next, Eldarion is his son. We see him in a what would you call that? A vision in the movie. Eldarion is born between the union of Aragorn and Arwen, which makes him, I guess, a half-elf, but we don't know if he has like any special abilities because of that. He's not F. Why am I putting him over there? I ranked him an A. I think was Eldarion just like his grandfather Elrond. I guess they call him half-elven. I don't know. He is said to have a great reign, rules for 100 years. I'm going to give him an A. It's not just a peaceful reign, it's a great reign. Alright, so he probably built on the foundation his father left him. Maybe expanded even more. Maybe did all kinds of reforms. Ruled great. Give him an A tier. We don't know what all he did because any stories about him were never written. And the proposed sequel about him, The New Shadow, I think it was, that Tolkien wasn't interested in continuing, takes place after Eldarion dies. We don't have the name of the king that comes after Eldarion, so we'll assume he did a good job. He did a good job. A New Shadow presumably would have risen, but it doesn't. So there we go. We've ranked the Kings of Arnor, and the distribution is a lot of Bs. Again, in this environment of not knowing much about the kings, I can't critically rate them as much as I would like to, which, I mean, probably take an even longer amount of time to do so. We have some C tiers who mainly either died in battle or made some poor decisions. I think almost all of them died in battle, except for Melvigil, only because he let Angmar rise. A D tier one, just because I need someone to be D tier, and Arvedui, he's probably a poor guy, but I mean, come on, his only success is that he had a son to pass on the line, so there's that. No F tier. We don't have a Castamir. We don't have someone who was so utterly destructive as king. We don't really have any king that apparently was indolent, like Narmakil, I think, was one for Gondor. There was a couple of them who were indolent and they didn't want to be king. Right? They didn't want to rule, but they wanted to enjoy all the comforts of being king, right? Which isn't terribly just in my mind, right? But we don't seem to have anybody like that in Arnor or Arthedain. Nobody who isn't trying to be a king. We definitely have guys who are not suited for the task, but they do something. They're trying, right? Even the guys who die in battle, they're trying to fight against the enemies, right? We don't know the nature of a lot of these wars, if they're defensive or offensive, but yeah. Maybe not as interesting, but I managed to talk about this almost, if not as long as the one for Gondorian, so this was fun. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this and you got a little I don't know, insight into my mind, or maybe got you thinking about politics or statecraft, or who knows, or you just like the idea of ranking fictional kings on things that they did or may not have done or stuff like that. So yeah, thanks for watching, and next time we'll do something else. All right, bye bye.